Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thank you, members of the Senate Education Committee. And as you know, over the last several years, what we can continue to do is to go ahead and put together, if you will, various trust funds for numerous purposes. And this one particularly, as I talk about this, is going to give us an opportunity to hear about another great need that we have here in the state. So in essence, Senate Bill 380 establishes the Physician Graduate Medical Education Trust Fund and the Physician Graduate Medical Education Program Fund to support residency programs in rural and underserved areas. The trust fund, financed through a $100 million appropriation from the general fund, will distribute 5% of its average market value annually to the program fund to support graduate medical education programs in rural areas. Just very quickly, and then Mr. Chair, I do have my expert witness with me today, Mr. Matt Probst. And with that, he is a PA, and he'll go ahead and he'll, with your permission, expand upon this a little bit more. But if I may, taking the resources, putting them into this fund, having, if you will, after about 3 years, having the interest generated, that would be the resources that we would use to continue to focus on this type of healthcare in the rural parts of our state. With that, Mr. Chairman, members of the Senate Education Committee, if I can in brevity ask Mr. Probst to further elaborate in terms of the great need that we have for the resources for programs such as this. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Members of the committee, I appreciate being in front of you today in the Education Committee. Usually I spend most of my time in the health committees, but as we know, the marriage between health and education is inseparable, and definitely the case when we're speaking about residencies and graduate medical education. I've spent the last 15 years advocating for us growing our own health professionals in the state of New Mexico, particularly those country docs that mentored me, that invested in me as a physician assistant and invested in many others, as I see that now they set off into the sunset of their careers. And now I'm in their place trying to mentor that next generation. Who will be next is the question. And for both health and education and every other need that we have in our great state, that is the question. How will we grow our next generation of health professionals? One of the biggest pieces of legislation, in my opinion, over these 15 years to pass through this legislature was our GME Council. And that House bill set the precedent for this, where we are today, to really establish and codify, if you will, residencies in New Mexico for growing our future physicians. That being said, like everything rural, it is fragile. It is based on a few. It is based on small agencies working together as teammates in partnership to create these rural opportunities. It is based on a few physicians that serve as faculty to create this ability to mentor this next generation. And with that fragility, and specifically when we're talking about funding streams, it is before you as a committee to set this path, to shore up with this fund, to shore up within the ebbs and flows that come of funding sources, of individual agencies, of vacancies, the ability to ensure that growing this next generation of physicians is we have the ability as a state.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Members of the Senate Education Committee, we're available for question.
Thank you. First out to the audience, those in support? Anyone in opposition? Okay, do we have anyone going on online? Questions from the committee? Senator Hickey.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Senator Campos. Witness, I appreciate the motivation behind the fund, and definitely we do need to grow our own cultural compatibility very important. I'm not quite sure that I see how decisions are going to be made in terms of how that money is spent. I know that some hospitals in the state, particularly, I want to call out in a very positive way, the Norley Hospital that is looking at creating family medicine residency, psychiatry residency, and so forth. So would this 5% earnings go to someone like that? In other words, that's a very concrete program and a very successful rural hospital in New Mexico. Others may want to do it, but may not have been building the infrastructure over time. So how are the decisions going to be made as to where to apply that fund?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thank you very much, Senator Hickey. I'm going to defer again to the expert to respond to that. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, Senator Hickey, as I stated earlier, in 2019 in House Bill 480, we created the GME expansion, and with that is a council. And so those decisions, that again, that precedent set, that foundation has been set with a board that can help to ensure that the best use of these funds for shoring up residency expansion as well as existing residencies. As you mentioned, we have some that are very solid. We have others that are currently in trouble. And so to best utilize the resources, we have that already in place.
Thank you, Compost and expert and Mr. Chair. One of the things I'm a little bit concerned about is that our availability, particularly in specialty areas around the state, and family practitioners, internists, pediatricians, and sometimes OBGYN, do ENT, do low back pain is one of the most common complaints, behavioral health. Are we going to be able to get them experiences in those other they're what make up a general practice, but will people travel around to get those if they're not available in a particular area?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Senator Hickey, again to defer to Mr. Probst for the response.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, Senator Hickey, that is the idea. Again, here we have, you mentioned the primary care residencies that this bill would support, and I want to add also psychiatry is another one there, and our great need for behavioral health in this state. And that is the idea. As you know, we've created a very successful model, and being here before Senate Education with hub and spoke for school-based health centers, and that idea that all these rural schools can get access by us working together cooperatively. And so that is the same idea with these rural residencies, that we have to create these partnerships across agencies. Unlike larger agencies, like, for example, the University of New Mexico, that may have all those resources in one place and all those experiences, that have rural residencies, we have to work together. And that's the idea of this fund, that when you create the complexity of a relationship, that if any one of those pieces in that it becomes at risk or falters, that we need to have the ability to catch a safety net, to catch that and to make sure that we can continue that. I want to point out one extremely important fact when it comes to the health of New Mexico, is that when we're talking about primary care physicians, which are the captains of all our healthcare teams, that in New Mexico, 80% of the time, where they do their residency is where they'll practice. If we cannot offer these rural residencies outside of Albuquerque, then we can expect 80% of our physicians to stay in Albuquerque.
Mr. Chair and Senator Campos, I completely agree with you. Way back in the day, in the mid-70s, I did the primary care residency in internal medicine, the first one in the country at the University of Rochester. And it was amazing the number of students from that program stayed in Rochester, New York. And I know the track record from Rob Williams of the people who have stayed in New Mexico, who get exposure, and you build your mentorship. I mean, it's really an apprenticeship. You build relationships. So I think it's really on the right track. I just want to be sure that we have the discipline to be able to get all of the quote specialty areas that are really make up a core of a primary care practice, so that we attract individuals from all over to the state for these programs, because they can definitely said influence the people to stay here. And I think, look, we love New Mexicans, but right now with the Black, we would love to have anybody from anywhere in the country do their residency and maybe overseas. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Senator Higgins.
Other questions? Senator Zell, anyone else want to be on the list? No? We good all? Okay.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. Senator Campos and Mr. Probst, appreciate you being here today. The problem with our medical care in the state of New Mexico is not concerning in here. It's the cost of malpractice insurance right now. And until we get that fixed, we cannot retain doctors here in the state of New Mexico. And everybody out in the audience is doing this. We have to get that problem fixed, Mr. Chair. Whenever that insurance is actually putting one doctor that is very concerned about this, it's cost them right at $700,000 a year. And that's out of control. Mr. Chairman and Senator Campos, I need some clarification on page 3 of your bill. This money is going to be appropriated for each fiscal year 2026 through 2028, up to $2,500,000 supporting the graduate program, up to $500,000 for supporting physician graduate medical education programs located in rural areas. For those programs that are less than 1 year, and then the next one has to do with more than 1 year. So can you kind of clarify that language there for me?
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Thank you, Senator Zell. I'm going to go ahead and respond after, but I'd like to have the expert talk a little bit about this, because oftentimes this seems like it may be specific to maybe just a few areas, but this takes the entire state into consideration. But if I may, I'd like to have the expert further respond, then possibly a final response from me, if I may, please. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, Senator Zell. Yes, so this is all encompassing for rural programs across the state of New Mexico. New Mexico Primary Care Training Consortium right now supports many of these programs all over the state, and so that is the intent. And so there are existing programs in the language of this bill. You'll see there are existing programs that would be these funds would be available to, should they again need that shoring up. And there is also the ability of any community in New Mexico, any rural community in New Mexico, to say we are ready to start planning a residency, and these funds would be available to them. The two residencies I can speak most to, because they're my home and have been working on these for a generation. One is in Espanola. The newest residency program is in Espanola now. They just placed their first residents. But again, even now, as they just place their first residencies, due to some difficulties with partners, they're already at risk. And so they just got started. We're on a planning grant right now in Las Vegas, New Mexico. And so, looking at our ability to be able to start up, can we also add another rural residency for the state of New Mexico? So the funds, this is a 1-year planning grant that we're on now. These funds would be available to those programs, the programs in the South, as well as any community in New Mexico that is interested, like we were this year in Las Vegas, New Mexico, to start exploring developing the residency.
Mr. Probst and Senator Campos, whenever you're talking about a partnership in our local communities, tell me a little bit, and you don't have to go into great detail, what the makeup of that partnership would be.
And thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Senator Ezell, just very quickly, as piggybacking on the past question. So as we deal with this, we're talking about all communities throughout, and I was just thinking of a few, Raton, Roswell, Gallup, Silver City. So it ties in then when we talk about the relationships within the community, and I believe that Mr. Probst and others have worked diligently to create, if you will, the consortia within northeastern New Mexico that deals directly with the question that you're talking about. And so if I may again, Mr. Chair, I'd like to defer to the expert to further provide a brief explanation. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, Senator Ezell, the main core of that partnership is between community health centers and rural hospitals. That is really the core. But within that, there is the ability to expand again with hub and spoke models to expand to many different health centers, all of the different settings that Senator Hickey mentioned with the state of New Mexico. So for example, in Las Vegas, we're also looking at partnering with the New Mexico Behavioral Health Institute, where we provide psychiatry services and have, experts that can serve in mentorship for residents there as well. And so that idea again, whether, and you know how broad this state is, but some of these specialties are very hard to come by outside of Albuquerque. And so the ability for residents in training from other parts of the state to be able to do clinical rotations at agencies like New Mexico Behavioral Health Institute as an example of furthering that partnership.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. Senator and Mr. Probst, thank you for that explanation. I'm seeing here that it could include a fellowship of up to 1 to 3 years. Is that correct?
Mr. Chair, Senator Ezell, you're correct.
And Mr. Chairman and Senator, Mr. Probst, what happens if a person decides, this isn't for me, I don't like living out in the rural areas of our state? What happens then?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and Senator Ezell, just briefly, the expert will respond to that because he lives this every day. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, Senator Ezell, there is a different program, loan for service programs, that would obligate students to serve in rural communities. That is not what we are speaking about here. This is really the training. So there is nothing that would obligate them to stay.
Okay.
However, I do want to give another fact. The number across the nation for residencies staying in the community they completed their residency is 40%. In our great state, it's double, 80%. It is our beauty of New Mexico, of our culture, of our people, and of our land, that when we can get them to come and complete their residencies here, that's why they stay.
And Mr. Chairman, I'm thrilled to hear those numbers right there. I really am. There's a lot to be said for the rural areas of New Mexico, isn't there? I'm from one of those, and I'm very proud of my area that I grew up in and still represent. And I'm sure that all these other people sitting up here will say the same thing. They're proud of their particular areas. But whenever we have such a lack of doctors that are trying to stay in business in our rural areas, it does get pretty hard. I mean, where I live, we have a choice of going to Albuquerque or Lubbock or El Paso. All of those are 200 plus miles away. So whenever we are taking this money and being able to get a partnership in our communities, and those people are wanting to stay there, that does my heart good. My niece graduated with honors from the nursing program at New Mexico State. I think it was 3 years ago. She is an emergency room nurse, and she was in Denver. She loved that job, and she's now a traveling nurse. And you know where she came back to? Artesia, New Mexico. She is there for, I think, 90 days. So, and then she's probably going to go back to Denver and take another venue. But it's getting those kids not kids, I'm sorry, these people that have been training for this back to their roots, maybe. And there's a loyalty there, in my opinion. Mr. Chairman, thank you very much for your responses. Thank you, Senator Campos.
Thank you. Senator Figueroa.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, sponsor, and Mr. This, my questions are logistical. I fully support this endeavor, and I fully believe building our capacity for residencies in rural areas will make a huge difference in access to medical care. Page 3, top of page 3, the healthcare authority shall administer the fund. That is the only sentence in here about how this will work. And Mr. Chair, the expert witness made a reference to the Graduate Medical Education Expansion Review Board, I think is their title, Board and Advisory Group. My concern is that is not in this bill. We don't even in this bill have the traditional language that says the healthcare authority shall promulgate some rules about an application process and who is eligible to apply and what's the criteria for selection. Are we going to prioritize specialties of high need, define high need? Even saying here underserved, we don't have a definition of underserved in this statute. And maybe, Mr. Chair, it's defined somewhere else. But I think we need those things in here to make sure that it is our Graduate Medical Education Expansion Review Board that is making this decision, and that we have some criteria to hold them accountable to. And then, of course, we need the line, and they will report out the results. But Mr. Chair and sponsor, do you have any comments on where that could be added, or are you concerned that it's not here?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Senator Figueroa. A couple of things related to the question, and it's a good one because you want the accountability as we move forward. Two things with the healthcare authority. Number one, they're working on about 5 different programs that are related to, if you will, how we're going to deal with behavioral health, specialties, and things of this nature. The resources would go and be administered by the HCA, and within the healthcare authority, they would develop and promulgate, if you will, rules, the way this would work, how the underserved would be dealt with, the resources and how they would be spread across the state, particularly to take care, if you will, of the residencies within rural parts of our state. Again, with what Mr. Probst is talking about is something that is already established, but again, the connectivity that we would work with would be the healthcare authority. From there, the resources then would go ahead and be distributed to work in these other capacities. But with that, Mr. Chair, if I may, and Senator Figueroa, one of the things that comes to mind is if we don't have the discussion how these things will work, how can we further, if you will, enhance and improve pieces of legislation? I would like to just in brevity again, Mr. Chair, if I may, ask the expert to further respond to what his response was when it came to how some of the resources could be administered.
Thank you, Senator. Mr. Chair, members of the committee, Senator Figueroa. Yes, and so the healthcare authority oversees the GME Council Review Board. That being said, it is not spelled out in the language, and from my perspective, I see no issue with amending that should that be the will of the committee at the discretion of the senator.
Mr. Chair and sponsor, I think that's a big amendment to do on the fly, and I'm going to leave that concern in your hands. I'm just going to say I would feel more comfortable when this comes to the floor if there are guidelines in there to ensure that the GME board is involved in this process and some of these terms are defined. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Senator Nava.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Senator. Hello, Doctor. Great to see you. I am going off of a bit of what Senator Figueroa was asking. On page 3, there's 5 times where rural and underserved areas are mentioned, but there is no actual definition for underserved areas. So can you provide the exact definition of underserved areas?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thank you very much, Senator Nava, again deferring to the expert. So as he lives this every single day, please help us to go and provide that particular definition as you use that in general practice day to day. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Mr. Chair, members of the committee, Senator Nava. So yes, so these are terms that I agree that here are listed without definition. However, within the rules of how funding works for programs, be it the residency programs, be it the loan for service programs in the state and the federal, there are specific definitions that can absolutely be spelled out to meet those concerns. And so those definitions and they are formulas that are based on population, many components to define underserved. We've got pieces that say, per capita, how much healthcare resource we have in terms of workforce. There are the socioeconomic factors that are taken into those equations as well.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Senator and Doctor. So that means Albuquerque, Santa Fe, and Las Cruces could be also defined.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, Senator Nava, that is absolutely correct. For example, federally qualified health centers like we have here in Santa Fe and La Familia Medical Center meet that definition.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, Senator, thank you so much for bringing this bill in front of us today. $100 million. We've 10, 15 years ago would have never ever thought of putting $100 million into this type of program. But thank you to our natural resources that we have here in the state of New Mexico. We are so gifted to be able to utilize our oil and gas monies that we receive on an annual basis to put into these type of programs. I just want to really bring that up because there's so many bills out there that can hurt the oil and gas and mining industry that we really depend on here in the state of New Mexico. Is there any type of, I know we mentioned earlier, any type of clawback that we can add to this bill to make sure that if they go through this process that they do stay in the state of New Mexico?
Mr. Chair, Senator Ramos, I'm going to again defer to the expert, and then if I may just possibly close in terms of one part of the question that I would like to respond to as well.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, Senator Ramos, not for this bill and not for the education component. For their actual practice, should folks in rural that decide they want to practice in rural areas, apply for programs like the state loan for service repayment program, the federal programs that exist. Yes, there are those. I did that. For me, it was easy. As Senator Zell said, I was always going to do rural because that's where born, raised, never left, never gonna leave was my motto. And so that piece was there. However, for my state loan for service payment program, if I did not fulfill my obligation, I would have had to pay back that loan 3 times the amount. This is, however, different. That is more about where I'm going to practice. This is about where you are going to be educated.
Mr. Chair, Senator, how many of our students going through the program actually go through the state loan program? Well, yeah, that's true, Mr. Chair, but I guess my point is if there's only a few people going through that state loan program, but yet they're utilizing this program, there's no clawback to keep them within the state of New Mexico. So that's kind of where I was going, Mr. Chair.
And thank you, Mr. Chair, and Senator Ramos, just briefly, if the expert will respond to that.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, Senator Ramos, I don't have the exact figure in terms of what percentage of residents trained in rural residencies in New Mexico utilize loan for service repayment programs, but I would say it's the majority of them that are able to do that, either National Health Service Corps programs or state loan for service or repayment programs.
Mr. Chair, Senator, and I just want to try and do everything I can to keep our doctors here. We've lost 30% of our doctors overnight with the bill that just drew people away. And we just need to make sure that we do not ever do that again and try and pass any bills that we can that's going to claw people back to keep them here in the state of New Mexico. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator. I have a couple of questions, comments, and things. First, I think the amount is insufficient. If we put 100,000 in there and are getting 7% off of it, that's going to provide only enough for maybe 35. Once it's fully active and funded, the initial numbers of 2.5 million, that funds about 12. And where I get that, I'm working on some other legislation, but residencies run from about 150,000 to about 220,000, depending on specialty. And so, that's 12, and they have to get funded every year for a minimum 3 years, and some are 5 or 6 years. And people hear me say regularly, we're a wealthy state. Part of the reason I've got a bill that puts $60 million into funding them right now, which would cover about 100 residencies, and outside the federal system. That seems to be where the bottleneck is. Is that accurate, that the federal system limits the number of residencies we can have at hospitals and other places? Is that accurate?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and I'm going to have the expert respond to that. And again, as we deal with that, particularly with our rural hospitals in terms of the numbers of residencies or even clinical sites, we're very limited, but at the same time, the expert, I'm sure, can go ahead and further elaborate. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, yes, there are limitations there, but I would say the greatest limitation for growing all healthcare professionals in New Mexico, all healthcare professionals, members of the healthcare team, is the ability to be preceptored and to have those training sites. So I hear you loud and clear regarding the dollars and the limitations of those dollars. That being said, we're in this chicken or an egg, right? And so again, the woes that we're facing today with our newest residency in Espanola, where the rate limiter right now for those 4 new residents, which over the course of 3 years will be 12, because you add 4 every year, and so by the 3rd year at 12, is now the potential of the hospital site losing a faculty member. And so when those things happen and all of those components, now you've also limited, it's a farm. I'm just a simple country boy, and in those components of those farms, you have to have all of those components. And so I think, again, the purpose of this bill is specifically to say that if any of those components in existing programs or in the creation of a new program become fragile, we have the ability as a state to shore that system up.
Thank you. And I've talked with the lady over at the Healthcare Authority, who is the one responsible for all of these things.
Lisa Reed.
And excited that we're working on trying to increase the number of residencies, and we can do it with state dollars outside the federal system, which makes it much easier to expand all of those. Also want to point out, and please correct me if I understand this incorrectly, but residencies are not a cost to the state or to the person. They're providing an extra physician in those communities right now. And so those are extra bodies that are seeing patients that are doing all of that, and they are still under one of the long-term docs there, but they are physicians in our communities. These are not, they're providing health care for people. And so the expansion of residencies expands immediately the doctors in those communities.
Mr. Chair,
nodding.
Just for a brief response, the expert will go and respond. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, you are absolutely correct. They immediately are providing care in these rural communities, supervised care, through those faculty members that are supervising them. So there's the immediate return as in part in their training. They are already physicians, they are resident physicians, already expanding care in our rural communities with that ability that if things go well, they become part of that 80%, that once they complete their residency, they stay and then they do what I'm trying to do and Senator Hickey and so many before, or now grow and create that farm and growing the next generation of physicians behind it.
And thank you. And this program really puts everything on the carrot side. We don't need a stick that might get people to not want to do this for fear they would not be able to leave later on. And again, where New Mexico has an 80% retention rate with residencies, the biggest bottleneck that we need to break is the lack of residencies in New Mexico. Our two main medical schools, Burrell College and UNM, we don't have enough residencies in New Mexico for all the graduates coming out. They go outside the state, which means that 40% or 80% where they do their residency, we're losing them. And so having the residencies in New Mexico kind of helps us double. Both it provides immediate physicians, but also provides for the long-term docs that are more likely to stay here. And again, my biggest concern, I'm not concerned about the rules or regulations. It's already in the healthcare authority. There's already a person there who's an expert on how to do this. They do all of that. They know how to use the money and make it flow. It's the insufficiency that it's only going to turn out 12. We ought to be using not just into a fund that's going to be using the interest, but I would like to see, and Mr. Sponsor, you are on the finance committee, but some direct funding right now to start this rather than just slowly as this fund builds up. We need to do it now when we've got money in the treasury, so to speak. We don't need to put more into Wall Street. We need to put it into education committee, but also healthcare and residencies right now because we've got the need. With that, is there a motion from the committee or Senator?
Mr. Chair, I move a do pass on Senate Bill 380.
I'll second.
Motion and a second. Senator Hickey, we already went around, so very quickly.
Mr. Chair, I'm glad to see that we're talking about higher education at this committee, even though this is postgraduate. I think that there needs to be a forum in the legislature that is really digging. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you, Senator. We have a motion and a second. If you'll call the roll, please.
Senator Boone. Senator Ezell.
Yes.
Senator Figueroa.
Yes.
Senator Hickey. Senator Nava.
Yes.
Senator Ramos.
Yes.
Senator Thornton.
No. Explain my vote.
Senator Pope.
Yes.
Senator Solz.
Yes. Okay. You have a do pass 8-1 and Senator. Oh, were there pass? I'm so sorry.
Oh, I thought they said yeses. I'm
Back to the pass.
sorry, I missed that.
Senator Boone.
Yes.
Senator Zell. Okay, so now we officially have it is 8-1. Senator Thornton, if you would please explain your vote.
So I go back to Senator Figueroa's comments with regards to the bill. I think it's a great bill, and I think the intent is fine. I think I'd like to see the promulgation of the rules, or promulgation of determining the selection process, all that defined, make sure those responsibilities, and reporting back so that we understand how successful the program is. So none of that is included in this, and so I'd like to see that added to the bill. Other than that, if that's brought it forward on the floor, I'll probably vote positive. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator. And so you have a do pass.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thank you, members of the Senate Education Committee.
Thank you. We're now going to go to Senate Joint Resolution 6. Senator Padilla, is he?